Dan Carson had to admit that his curiosity was piqued. Ben Stevens had asked to meet with him at Megan's Ale House. He hadn't seen Ben in several years, although they had been pretty good friends at one time. Dan was sipping a beer when Ben entered the bar. The two men shook hands before Ben asked the bartender for a draft beer. Dan waited patiently for Ben to return and take a seat. "I know you must be wondering why I asked you to meet me tonight. I wish I had better news, but it is what it is," began Ben. "We've known each other for 18 years, give or take. Years ago, we were pretty good friends, but we were never as tight as our wives are." Dan felt a knot begin to form in his stomach. He immediately wondered what news Ben had for him, and just how bad it might be.
Welcome to the Dark Side channel. Dive into the world of human relationships, mistakes, and right decisions. Don't miss out. Subscribe and join our growing community.
"You can't lead with a comment like that and then change the subject," Dan stated. "Do you have bad news about Angie, Donna, or about both of them? Has there been an accident or something?" "I guess you could call it an accident. I don't know if you remember my army buddy Glenn Thomas, but he called me 2 days ago with some bad news. His daughter Julie works on a cruise ship. She's a bartender on the Sea Princess, the same ship that our wives are on. Like I said, Glenn and I were in the army together and became best friends. We always had each other's back." "How does all of that concern me?" Dan demanded. "Does Angie have a problem, or did she get hurt? I'm getting to it. This is hard as hell for me, but I think you need to know. Our wives appear to be on some sort of sex junket," Ben revealed as he wiped a lone tear off his cheek. "What in hell are you talking about? Our wives wouldn't cheat on us, especially with their other friends on the same cruise. They'd never be able to keep it secret." "They don't have to, Dan. All 5 of them are getting their brains fucked out on that fucking ship," Ben replied. "They each have their own room and have a male friend shacking up with them." "How can you be so damn sure of this?" Dan asked. "It could be Julie saw something that she misinterpreted. I don't think she even knows Angie. I bet when the facts come out you'll feel pretty foolish about these accusations." Julie recognized Dana the same night they set sail. She and the other 4 were at the bar Julie was working. "Dana never recognized Julie, obviously," Ben added. "The 5 were drinking a lot and got pretty loose with their conversation. The gist of it was they were going to bed 5 lucky bastards that Michelle had lined up for them. You know how they were all in the same sorority in college?" Ben continued. "It seems they made a pact way back then that they'd get together in 25 years for a week of casual sex with men who were not their husbands or boyfriends. The women were drinking and talking at the bar for almost an hour when 5 men sauntered up and joined them. They took their drinks to a table too far away for Julie to hear their conversation," Ben said. "She was able to see them quite clearly, however, and they were making out with the guys like schoolgirls at the prom. I'm sure you mean well, Ben. You drove quite a distance tonight to tell me this. But I still have some doubts. Your friend's niece doesn't know Angie. She may not have been part of that group," Dan reasoned. "I'm not going to ruin a 20-year marriage because your friend's daughter saw your wife and thought one of the women with her was Angie. It's too big a stretch. I trust Angie implicitly." "I understand that," Ben agreed. "Hell, Julie's seen Dana quite a few times when she was younger, but I still couldn't bring myself to believe what Glenn told me about what she saw and heard. Julie was 13 the last time she saw Dana. Julie's changed her hair color and grown up since then. She was certain that Dana didn't recognize her. You know how bartenders and maintenance workers become almost invisible to most of us as we go through our days. When I told Glenn that I thought Julie was mistaken, he told me he thought that I'd feel that way, so he showed me a dozen photos that Julie had surreptitiously snapped with her phone. Sure as shit, Angie and Dana were in them, as well as the other 3 fucking sluts." Ben practically snarled. "You have pictures?" asked Dan. "Even so, sitting around a bar with friends on a cruise ship doesn't prove infidelity. There could be another explanation." Again, I thought the same thing until Glenn sent me the photos. They were bad enough to cause me a sleepless night, Ben admitted. "Since I couldn't sleep, I had lots of time to stew over this." I thought of Rob Hansen, Josie's husband. You know he comes from old money, and lots of it. I remembered that Dana once told me that he made Josie sign a prenuptial agreement. It occurred to me that a wealthy man with a possibly unfaithful wife might have the inclination and wherewithal to investigate the situation. I called him first thing the next morning. To say he was interested is an understatement. Did he agree to check into it? Dan asked. I wonder if he'll be able to find out anything since they're at sea. He can't get a detective on board now. It's a 5-day whoopee cruise to nowhere. There aren't any ports of call. Angie told me that the 5 women just wanted to enjoy some time together, like the old days. She never said anything about all of them getting laid like their college days. As I said, he has money and a lot of it. He knows a guy who, for a substantial fee, can manage the impossible, Ben revealed. His fixer found out that there was a vacationing private detective on board the ship. They agreed on the fee, and the detective was on the job by noon. From your grim attitude, I'll bet that the private dick got the goods on Josie, Dan surmised. Since the 5 are together so much, they must all have some damning evidence against them. That's exactly what happened. They weren't very discreet once they left port. Hansen sent me a shitload of photos and videos. Our wives are fucking stars. I mean that literally, Ben stated. How did he get access to their rooms? Dan asked. I don't think that's legal, or at least not admissible in court. What the fuck are you talking about? Ben demanded. Most states are no fault, including the one we live in. All I needed was to see Dana with her big-cocked lover to know my marriage was over. I don't need to prove shit to anyone else. I'll show her a few highlights so she won't try to talk her way out of a divorce, Ben declared. I think she'll be pretty reasonable when she realizes the havoc I can wreak on her career and family. I can't argue with your logic, Dan admitted reluctantly. I hope one of the reasons we're meeting tonight is so you can give me the files showing my loving wife's debauchery. Yeah, I have a flash drive with everything, including Dana, Michelle, Josie, and Taylor, replied Ben as he handed the device to Dan. Taylor's already divorced, so she won't suffer much, if at all. Hansen told me he's dumping Josie like a bad habit. I know that I can't stay married to Dana after this kind of betrayal. It was planned 25 years ago. Can you believe this shit? This certainly puts a real strain on my marriage, Dan said in agreement. If the proof is as damning as you're telling me, I can't imagine staying married. I never heard of women planning to cheat on their husbands before they even met them. I wonder if we can use the videos from the room in any possible lawsuits. You're hung up on hoping that some law will somehow save your ass, Ben declared. If it makes you feel better, Hansen said he'd grant us permission to use anything that he supplies to us. Remember how his wife booked the cruise and paid for all the rooms so they could have a contiguous block? Our wives paid her back, but all of the rooms were booked on one of Rob Hansen's credit cards. He gave the PI permission to plant electronic devices in the rooms. Since the detective couldn't go shopping for that shit on the ship, he used his wife's, and his brother-in-law's phones to bug the rooms and get the goods on the cheating bitches. It required 2 nights since there were 5 sluts and only 3 phones, but the guy earned his money. Hansen was going to contact Michelle's husband tonight. He suggested that we all get our ducks in a row before we let the women know that the shit has hit the fan. He said we need to find a capable lawyer immediately and follow his suggestions. Dan was reeling from all the information Ben had given him. His wife was a cheating slut, and he needed a lawyer pronto to protect his interests. A few hours ago, he had been scanning the internet for ideas for Angie's birthday. That problem was no longer a concern. I don't know what to say, Dan confessed. I'm stunned. I don't feel like thanking you for letting me know the situation, but I sure as hell appreciate knowing what's really going on. I have a lot to think about. Angie's going to be home Saturday, so I need to get working on this tomorrow morning. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, Dan, but you needed to know, Ben responded as he held out his hand. The 2 men shook hands briefly and went their separate ways. Saturday morning found Angie anxious to get home. Her cruise with her friends had been an extremely enjoyable experience. She had thanked Michelle several times for lining up such passionate, experienced men for the week's activities. Michelle had promised she'd handle that part of the pact 25 years ago, and she had more than fulfilled her promise. Angie wanted to reconnect with Dan after all the sex she had enjoyed with the other men. All the participants had agreed that it had been a one-time event and none of the men would ever try to contact any of the women again. It was safer that way. Angie knew Dan would be eager for sex since they had been separated for a week. He was a good man and a patient lover, but lacked the stamina and enthusiasm of the slightly younger men who had spent the week with her and her friends. She found herself looking forward to the slow, gentle love-making of her husband. She'd do her best to put the others in her past and concentrate on pleasing her husband. He deserved to be rewarded. Angie had texted Dan that she'd be home by noon, and was surprised that Dan wasn't there to greet her upon her return. As she dragged her luggage from the garage into the house, she realized that something seemed off. Was it her guilty conscience, or was something actually amiss? Angie decided not to dwell on it, and carried her suitcases up the stairs to the master bedroom. She was torn between taking a relaxing hot shower and unpacking her bags. She hated that part of traveling, but she decided to bite the bullet and put away her good clothes and place what needed to be washed in the laundry room. Angie took a long, relaxing shower and was a bit flummoxed that Dan wasn't home yet. This was out of character for him. They had agreed to not call each other while she was on her cruise unless there was an emergency. That wasn't unusual for them. Talking to each other on the phone never had much appeal for either of them, so they usually waited until they were reunited to share any news they might have. Angie became more concerned as the day wore on. She tried calling Dan a few times, but her calls always went straight to voicemail. As evening approached, Angie called her daughter, Monica, who was a freshman in college.
"Hello, Mother,"
was Monica's rather unemotional greeting.
"Hello, sweetheart,"
Angie responded cheerfully.
"I'm back from the cruise and thought I'd see how you're doing. I missed you every day."
"Have you talked with Dad yet?" was Monica's immediately response. Baffled by her daughter's terse reply, Angela admitted that she had not.
"He doesn't answer his phone and he isn't home, so I haven't seen him yet. Do you have any idea where he might be?"
"I really don't, Mother. I think you should talk to him before we have our discussion," Monica stated flatly, before disconnecting the call. Angie tried calling Monica back several times, but her calls went directly to voicemail. Concerns about the cruise began creeping into Angie's thoughts. There was no way Dan could know about the activities of the past week. All 5 of the women had vowed to keep it secret until death. It was almost 6 when Angie heard the garage door open. She was sitting at the kitchen table facing the door to the garage when Dan stepped into the house. Not knowing exactly what was going on, Angie had decided to behave as she usually did. That meant she would let Dan know that she was pissed that he hadn't been home when she returned from her vacation, and that he hadn't answered her calls or returned her texts.
"Why didn't you answer my calls or at least my text messages?"
Angie demanded before Dan could take a seat. "I was worried about you. You never shut me down like this before, and I want an explanation. The short answer is that you're a fucking cheating slut, unworthy on any effort I might expend on your behalf. I'm sure that you'll force the long answer out of me before this is over." Angie didn't try to hide her shock and dismay at Dan's pronouncement. "How can you call me, your wife of over 20 years, a slut? An apology is in order, and I mean right now." "I agree, although it won't do any good," Dan replied. "I'm anxious to hear this, so try to make it sound believable." "I meant that you owed me an apology, you asshole," Angie snarled. "I thought we'd go upstairs and take care of our pent-up desires, but that isn't going to happen now." "That's a relief," Dan retorted. "I won't have to risk STDs or falling into that stretched-out tunnel and getting lost." Angie had tried to pretend that she didn't understand Dan's comment about being a slut, but she now realized he had some inkling of what went on during the cruise. She decided on a different tact. "Why are you so rude, sweetheart? We've been separated for a week, and I thought you'd be glad to see me. Why all the crude insults?" "What you refer to as insults, I call facts. You don't need to pretend anymore, Angie. The cat's out of the bag, or maybe I should say the pussy is up for grabs," Dan replied sarcastically. "You spent the entire cruise getting fucked every which way but up. Wait, I was wrong about that. You're as fucked up as anyone I ever met." "You think I had sex with some man while I was on the cruise? Is that what this is about? Asked Angie as she sought the high ground.
You can ask any of the girls. They'll tell you I was totally faithful. I never so much as flirted with a man, although there were more than a few who acted interested. I take my vows seriously.
I'm sure you do, replied Dan with a grim smile. You made a vow with your friends to get your brains fucked out this year, and you kept it. I can't tell you how proud that makes me. It's just too bad you didn't take our marriage vows as seriously.
Dan, someone has been giving you bad information. They must be trying to break us up. They have some unknown agenda, Angie reasoned. Angie, I've always been faithful to you. I was in this marriage for the long run, but you made plans to cheat on me or whoever your husband might be before we even met. That isn't the worst of it. You kept that vow. I don't have to tell you that the two vows are extremely contradictory. Who told you about that silly pact? It was made one night when we had too much to drink our freshman year. None of us took it seriously. I'd never cheat on you, Angie insisted. I have to give you credit for coming up with some impressive bullshit in an attempt to avoid the truth. You won't be gaslighting me anymore, Angie. I was in an alternate reality for the 20 years we were married, but I'm in the real world now, Dan stated. Your version of how the world worked was less painful, at least until I found out the truth. I won't knowingly live a lie. I won't live with a liar either. I got home a bit late because I was doing the paperwork on an apartment down on Jackson Street. I guess you didn't look in my closet, but it's pretty much empty. I'm divorcing you. The papers should be ready next week. Look them over. Get your own attorney and let's get this settled, Dan suggested. There's no sense giving any more of our money to lawyers than we have to. Dan, why aren't you listening to me? Angie pleaded. Your imagination is destroying your ability to think clearly. There's no reason to be angry or even jealous. I didn't do anything inappropriate on that ship. We may have had too much to drink, but none of us broke our wedding vows. For some reason, I thought we might have a civilized conversation about this mess. I was hoping that you'd explain to me how you found it so easy to shit all over me in our marriage, Dan stated forcefully. I've had enough of this bullshit. With that statement, Dan stood and went out to the garage. Angie heard his car start as the overhead door rumbled open. Soon she heard the door close again, followed by silence. She stirred from her trance when her phone rang. It was Dana. Angie decided to answer it in hopes her friend would have some information about how much the husbands knew. Angie, we're fucked, Dana blurted. You thought we were well and truly fucked on that ship, but that was nothing compared to what our husbands are going to do to us. What are you talking about? Angie demanded. Ben told me that all of the husbands have pictures and videos of us having sex with those guys Michelle supplied, Dana revealed. They even have the names and addresses of the guys. This is going to be a huge clusterfuck. Ben says he's divorcing me as soon as possible. What are we going to do? Shit, Angie exclaimed as she considered what her friend was telling her. How could they have found out? How could they have videos? I bet Ben is bluffing. I thought the same thing until he showed me a video where I was swallowing Jason's sword while you and Grant cheered me on. It's hard to dispute facts like that. Ben is furious. I don't think he's going to forgive me for this mistake. Damn it! I wish I'd known this sooner. I just swore to Dan that we were all faithful to our husbands on the cruise. He probably saw videos of me taking cocks in all kinds of ways. It looks like I'll be divorced soon, too. Shortly after Angie disconnected from Dana, she received a call from Monica. Dad said he talked to you about the divorce. He also said that you denied everything. I told him that you would, unless he showed you the pictures and videos first. Monica, it was all a mistake. We had too much to drink. Those guys forced themselves on us while we were in a weakened state.
Can't you ever say anything that's true? Those guys didn't force themselves on you, especially not for 5 days. You loved it. All of your friends loved it, Monica added. You planned on cheating on Dad when you left on your vacation with your friends. Now Dad's divorcing you. I'm just glad I'm out of the house and in college now. It won't be that big of a deal for me. Did your father tell you about the videos and pictures? Angie asked meekly. I insisted that he send me a few of the more offensive videos, or I wouldn't believe what he was telling me. I never knew you liked being spanked, Mom. You saw that? Angie gasped. Your father never should have let you see that video. I really didn't like being spanked. I told the guy to stop. Well, in defense of your lover, your words sounded kind of garbled, like you had marbles or something in your mouth, Monica responded. Oh no, I'm going to sue whoever took those videos, Angie promised. That's an invasion of privacy. They had no right to place any electronic device in my room. That was not meant to ever be seen by anyone. Good luck with that, Mother. Cynics might suggest that married women shouldn't engage in that sort of activity. At least not with men who are not their husbands, Monica pointed out. That would avoid any kind of embarrassment, don't you think? I'm not going to discuss this subject with you anymore, Angie stated. I have to find out what my friends know and see if we can stop those videos from being leaked all over the internet. Over the next few hours, Angie learned just how the videos were taken and who gave permission to place the recording devices in the staterooms. 4 friends blamed Josie for not recognizing Julie, who she had not seen since the woman was a young teen. Angie literally begged Dan to forgive her. She thought that he should have some consideration for her 20 years of being a faithful, loving wife before she slipped just one time. Dan was unable to get over the planned disrespect. Angie didn't have sex with those men because she was drunk or high. It was planned well in advance, and she had been a willing and eager participant. He apologized to Angie's aged parents that he simply could not trust Angie. Without trust, they had nothing upon which to build. Monica rarely came home from college, and when she did, she was very cool toward her mother. In an act of desperation, Angie decided to seek help. She had come to realize that her behavior was self-destructive and totally inappropriate. I'm glad to hear you getting some counseling, Angie. What you did was totally wrong. You need to find out what triggered your behavior and learn to control it, Dan told her. You'll never have a strong relationship with anyone, including your daughter and your parents, until you gain control of your life. You've got to rebuild respect and trust, and that takes time. 3 weeks before the divorce was scheduled to be official, Angie was in a car accident. She was sobbing over her situation when she ran a red light. A pickup truck smashed into the driver's side door, pinning her in her car. Paramedics and firemen worked almost an hour to free her. Dan was at work when he received a call from Angie's father, telling him of the accident and the hospital where Angie was being treated. Dan was surprised at how upsetting the thought of Angie dying or being severely injured was. He had convinced himself that he had put that part of his life behind him as he struggled to regain his equilibrium. Dan met Angie's parents at the hospital. Her injuries aren't life-threatening, but she's going to be laid up for a few weeks, Angie's father explained. We'll try to get a nurse to come in every day when Angie's allowed to go home. As you know, her mother is suffering from the early stages of dementia, and I have my hands full caring for her. I wouldn't be able to give Angie the kind of help she's going to require. I think I could spend a few weeks helping her get back on her feet, replied Dan without thinking it through. I can do most of my work remotely, so she'd have someone around most of the time. Why would you do that, Dan? Angie's father asked. You've made it quite clear that you didn't trust Angie. Your divorce will be final in a few weeks. Why muddy the waters? She's still the mother of my daughter, and we were married for 20 years. I think I owe her that consideration. It certainly doesn't mean I want to get back with her, Dan added. That ship has sailed. Angie was both surprised and pleased to learn that Dan was going to care for her while she recovered. She felt confident that she could wear down his stubborn resistance with her ample feminine charms. She decided that the accident may have been a blessing in disguise. 2 days later, Angie was released from the hospital. Dan helped her into his car and drove her home. Angie really was sore, and her left knee was swollen and stiff. The first night home, she fell asleep in the early evening and didn't wake up until the sun was rising. Dan was very attentive. He made a breakfast for her and helped her into the bathroom. Once she was back in her bed, he explained that he had to go into work for a few hours. He needed to talk to his superior about working remotely. His boss was very understanding. He quickly agreed to Dan's request. Dan and Angie only spoke to each other when necessary for the first 2 days. After 20 years, Angie was able to read Dan's moods, and she sensed the time wasn't right to pursue her plan. It was her 3rd day home when Angie asked Dan, "Could you help me take a shower? I've only had sponge baths since my accident and I'm feeling pretty grungy."
I suppose I could help you to the bathroom and get the water started. Will you be able to stand and wash yourself? Dan questioned. I really doubt it. You've seen all of me for the last 20 years, so why don't you take a shower with me? I won't attack you. Hell, I can hardly walk. Dan wound up naked in the shower as he steadied Angie to be sure she didn't slip and further injure herself. Could you wash my back, Dan? I can't move my left arm very well. Before he realized what he was doing, Dan was gently washing Angie's magnificent breasts. Before long, Dan was soaping the golden triangle he had so thoroughly enjoyed for so many years. To his surprise, Angie shuddered and came within minutes. Thanks, Dan. I feel so much better now. Would you like me to return the favor? Asked Angie with a huge smile. Dan knew he was losing his resolve, so he dressed quickly and left the bedroom. He decided that it was normal for him to find a woman he had been married to and had loved for over 20 years to be attractive. It wasn't normal to accept her vacation fuckfest while she was married to him. He increased his resolve to carry through with the divorce and rid himself of a cheating wife. Dan tried hard to be cold and remote toward Angie, but she didn't seem to notice. She was always smiling and complimenting him on the simplest of things. A week after he had begun helping Angie, she straight out asked, Dan, why do we have to get divorced? I know I made a mistake, but I'd never do it again. I had a wonderful, devoted, loving husband. I'd never risk losing him that again. I love you far too much. I gave you plenty of chances to come clean about that so-called vacation of yours, but you kept lying to me. You insisted you were a faithful wife while I'd seen videos of you performing sex acts we never even thought to try. The lying was the final nail in the coffin. I had to lie, Dan. I didn't know how much you had seen or heard, so I had to do my best to not hurt you. If you only suspected what I had done, I thought I could eventually convince you nothing had happened, Angie reasoned. The problem is, I did see you with those men, doing all kinds of things we never tried, mostly because you told me you weren't comfortable doing them, and I believed you, Dan replied. Those videos were damning. I still haven't been able to sleep through the night without nightmares about you and those bastards on that ship. I'd gladly do all of those things, and so much more for you if you'd let me, Angie promised. Why did I have to catch you sleeping with the 5 amigos before you were willing to do that stuff with me? Dan demanded. Because I wanted you to respect me as your wife and the mother of your child. I have thought about doing them with you, especially on my way home from that trip, Angie explained. For some reason, I thought sucking you to completion or allowing you anal would lessen your respect and love for me. The problem now is that I never know when to believe you, Angie. You've shown me that you're a liar, a slut, and a rather poor driver. Dan felt pretty good about how he had handled the situation, but he had badly underestimated Angie's determination. One evening, as they watched television, Angie convinced him that she could have a small amount of wine since she had greatly reduced her medications. Dan caved and brought her a small glass of wine and a whiskey for himself. During a commercial, Angie got to her feet and hobbled into the other room. Dan realized that Angie would not need him much longer. She returned with the whiskey bottle and poured a generous amount into his glass. Dan decided not to protest and sipped the whiskey while enjoying an action flick. Angie insisted on a romance movie next, and Dan found himself nodding off. Angie knew he couldn't stay awake for sappy romances. Even if we get divorced, I want to do that for you every night until you go back to your apartment, Angie told him. I'm trying to repay you for taking such good care of me, especially after I disappointed you so badly. Ben helped Angie to her bed and went to the guest room. He had trouble falling to sleep as he thought about Angie and all she had meant to him over the years. Would he be better off without her? He began to wonder. Angie met with her shrink every 2 weeks. She had missed a session because of her accident, but insisted she attend her next one. She wanted Dan to know how serious she was about becoming a more stable, honest person. I have some great news, Dr. Beckwith, Angie began. Dan has been taking care of me since my accident. I think he's beginning to soften his attitude toward me. That's great news, praised the doctor. Do you feel you understand how much you hurt your husband with your infidelity? Will you be able to avoid situations like that in the future? I'll make sure of it.
At least until I gain Dan's complete trust again, stated Angie. I'm picking up something from what you just said, replied the doctor. Are you saying you won't stray again, at least until Dan trusts you fully? Would you have an affair after that trust is gained? It worked a few times over the past 20 years, admitted Angie. He trusted me completely, so it wasn't difficult to have an occasional fling. He's such a nice guy. He never suspected. I found out last night that I just need to do something for him, and he'll be eating out of my hand. I'm feeling pretty good about things today. Angie, I'm not here to tell you how to conduct your life, but let me say this. If your husband takes you back and you cheat on him again, he will find it out, and it will quite possibly destroy him. Do you have any love for him at all? What kind of question is that? Of course I love him. It's just that I like a little variety. Dan's a great guy and a selfless lover, but he doesn't give me that special excitement I get when I'm with a strange man, especially a dominant one. I do love Dan. Again, I'm not here to judge, but I would suggest that you don't really love your husband. He's simply convenient and safe. If you loved him, you'd either be faithful or set him free. Can't you see that? Asked Beckwith. 2 days later, Dan had to go into the office for a meeting. It didn't last as long as he expected, so he found himself pulling into Angie's driveway at 3 p.m. He noticed a Lexus parked in the street and briefly wondered who owned it. Angie was in her bedroom with a tall, muscular younger man pounding her into the mattress. Angie didn't look, but she heard the bedroom door open slowly. Less than a minute later, she heard the front door slam. Tears trickled down her cheeks. She knew that Dan had come home and seen her. He had always slammed the front door when he was angry. She had proven her love and set Dan free. It greatly saddened her. At that very moment, her young lover gave her ass an especially hard smack and drove as hard as he could into her. Angie suddenly experienced one of the most intense emotions of her life.